We like to believe that objects are passive, that wood, metal, and cloth are merely materials, dead, silent, and indifferent to our lives. We build our homes, we craft our furniture, and we assume that we are the masters of our environment. But there is a darker school of thought, one whispered in the corners of antique shops and the back rooms of museums. It is the belief that objects have memory, that intense emotion, pain, betrayal, terror, can stain a physical object just as blood stains fabric. If an object witnesses enough hatred, does it start to hate back? In the rolling green hills of North Yorkshire, England, stands a town called Thirsk. It is a picturesque place, a postcard of English countryside life. But just outside the town, at a lonely crossroads, stood an inn with a reputation that curdled the blood of the locals. For years, patrons would enter, drink their ale, and laugh, all while avoiding one specific corner of the room. In that corner sat a simple, high-backed oak chair. It wasn't remarkable to look at. It had spindle legs and worn armrests. But for over 300 years, this chair has been the center of a macabre phenomenon that defies statistical probability. It has been linked to car accidents, air crashes, fatal illnesses, and inexplicable suicides. The locals call it the Busby Stoop Chair. The legend says that anyone who sits in it is marked for death. Not in 10 years, not in 20, but soon. Is it a coincidence? A case of mass hysteria? Or is it possible that a 300-year-old curse is actually working? To understand the chair, we have to peel back the layers of history. We have to go back to a time before electricity, before cars, to a cold night in 1702, and meet the monster who started it all. The year is 1702. The reign of Queen Anne has just begun. England is a place of stark contrast, wealth and poverty, elegance and brutality. In the rural north, the law is often just a suggestion. It is here that we find Thomas Busby. History often romanticizes villains, but there was nothing romantic about Busby. Records from the time paint a picture of a man who was deeply unpleasant. He was a bully, a drunkard, and a brute. But he was also ambitious. He wasn't content with farming the land. He wanted easy money. And in the early 18th century, the easiest way to make money was to make it yourself. Literally. Busby was a coiner. Along with his father-in-law, Daniel Oddie, he ran a counterfeiting ring. In a hidden workshop, they would take official gold coins, clip the edges off, and melt those clippings down to create fake currency. It was treason against the crown, punishable by death. But it was profitable. This criminal enterprise forged a bond between Busby and Oddie, but it was a bond made of rusted iron. They hated each other. Daniel Oddie was the older, more calculating criminal. He had bought a farmstead called Donati Hall, and he looked down on Busby. He saw his son-in-law as a loose cannon, a drunk who was going to get them both hanged. To make matters worse, Busby had married Oddie's daughter, Elizabeth. It was a volatile marriage. Oddie constantly interfered, telling Busby he wasn't good enough, threatening to take Elizabeth back to Donati Hall, and, most dangerously, threatening to inform the authorities about the coining operation if Busby didn't fall in line. The tension between the two men was like a room filled with gas, waiting for a spark. That spark came on a summer evening in 1702. Thomas Busby returned home to his small cottage after a day of drinking. He was already in a foul mood, his mind clouded with alcohol and paranoia. When he pushed open his front door, he stopped dead. There, in the center of the room, was Daniel Oddie. The older man wasn't just visiting, He was asserting dominance. He was threatening to take Elizabeth away for good. But what made Busby's blood boil wasn't just the words. It was the posture. Daniel Audi was sitting in Thomas Busby's favorite chair. It was a sturdy, wooden armchair. In the psychology of a man like Busby, a man who felt small, who felt persecuted, that chair was his throne. It was the one place in the world where he was the master. Seeing his enemy, his tormentor, relaxing in his chair was the ultimate sign of disrespect. The argument that followed was violent. Screams echoed through the thin walls of the cottage. Busby, in a blind rage, physically threw Audi out of the house. He swore at him, spitting threats into the night air as Audi retreated down the dark road back to Danoddy Hall. Most men would have let it end there. They would have passed out, slept off the drink, and woken up with a headache. But Thomas Busby was not most men. He sat in the chair, stewing in his humiliation. Every minute that ticked by, his anger didn't cool. It calcified. It turned into something cold and hard. Around midnight, Busby stood up. He didn't reach for a bottle. He reached for a hammer. The walk to Danoddy Hall was quiet. Under the cover of darkness, Busby crept into the house where his father-in-law slept. The violence that ensued was brutal and short. Busby bludgeoned Daniel Audi to death in his bed. When the sun rose, the reality of the crime set in. In 1702, forensic science did not exist. But you didn't need science to solve this murder. The feud was public knowledge. Busby's temper was legendary. He was arrested almost immediately. The trial at the York Assizes was a formality. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. But the authorities didn't just want Busby dead. They wanted to make an example of him. They ordered that after his hanging, his body was to be gibbeted. This meant his corpse would be dipped in tar to preserve it, placed inside a metal cage, and hung from a post at the crossroads near the scene of his crime. It was a warning to others. This is what happens to murderers. On the day of his execution, as was the custom for condemned men, Busby was allowed a final drink at the local inn, the very inn that would later bear his name. He was led in, shackles rattling on the floorboards. The patrons fell silent. Busby walked to his favorite chair, the one Audi had sat in, and sat down. He drank his ale in silence. When the guards grabbed his arms to haul him to the gallows, Busby resisted. He gripped the wooden armrests of the chair until his knuckles turned white. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the terrified locals, and he delivered the curse that would outlive him by centuries. His voice was described as a guttural growl. "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was dragged out, hanged, and his body was hoisted into the gibbet at the crossroads. For years, his rotting corpse swung in the wind, the metal cage creaking in the night. The inn nearby became known as the Busby Stoop Inn, named after the stoop or post where he hung. Eventually, the body disintegrated. The gibbet was taken down. But the chair remained in the pub, and the locals, superstitious and fearful, gave it a wide berth. For a long time, nothing happened. The curse lay dormant, like a virus waiting for a host. Centuries rolled by. The horse and cart gave way to the steam train, and the steam train gave way to the automobile. By the 1940s, the world was at war. North Yorkshire became a hub for the Royal Air Force and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Specifically, the Skipton-on-Swale airfield was just a few miles from the Busby Stoop Inn. The pub became the local watering hole for hundreds of young airmen. War changes the psychology of men. These pilots were living on borrowed time. They watched their friends die in the skies over Germany every night. They developed a dark sense of humor, a fatalistic bravado. Superstitions weren't things to be feared. They were things to be mocked. The legend of the death chair became a challenge. The pilots would drink heavily, and eventually, one would dare another. Go on, sit in the chair. Or are you scared of an old ghost? This is where the timeline of the curse shifts from folklore to documented tragedy. Pub records and witness accounts from the 1940s tell a chillingly consistent story. There were nights when the pub was rowdy, filled with smoke and song. A pilot, emboldened by liquid courage, would jump into the chair, laughing, perhaps pretending to be strangled by a ghost for a joke. The room would cheer. But the laughter stopped the next morning. There are verified accounts of Canadian airmen who sat in the chair and never made it back from their next mission. In one specific instance, a pilot who sat in the chair to impress a waitress was killed the very next day when his Spitfire malfunctioned on the runway, a freak mechanical failure. Another night, 2 pilots sat in the chair together, squeezing into the seat as a prank. They left the pub late that night to drive back to the base. The road was straight. The weather was clear. Yet their vehicle left the road and smashed into a tree with such force that the engine block was pushed into the cabin. Both men died instantly. The locals began to whisper. The landlord began to worry. But the war machine ground on, and the steady stream of new, skeptical young men meant the chair always had fresh victims. When the war ended, you might expect the curse to fade. But the 1960s and 70s brought a new kind of victim. These weren't soldiers facing enemy fire. These were ordinary people living mundane lives. And that is what made their deaths so terrifying. In 1967, 2 Royal Air Force pilots, a new generation, stopped at the Busby Stoop Inn. They had heard the stories, but they were modern men of science and aviation. They didn't believe in 18th century warlocks. They sat in the chair, ate their lunch, and left. On their way out, they even joked with the landlord, Tony Earnshaw. 20 minutes later, their Land Rover collided head-on with a heavy goods truck. The wreckage was so severe that emergency responders struggled to identify the bodies. Tony Earnshaw, the landlord at the time, was a grounded, practical man. He was not prone to flights of fancy, but he began to notice a pattern that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the pilots. There was the case of the hod carrier, a strong, fit construction worker. He was having a drink with his colleagues during a lunch break. The chair was, by this point, kept in the cellar to prevent accidents, but the workers had gone down to fetch barrels. The hod carrier saw the old chair and dropped into it to rest. His friends warned him. He laughed. "I've got more to worry about than a chair," he said. That afternoon, back on the job site, he was carrying a load of bricks up a ladder. He had climbed that ladder 1,000 times, but this time he slipped. He fell 4 stories to the concrete below. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. Then there was the cleaning lady. This story is perhaps the most tragic because it was an accident. She wasn't taunting the ghost. She was mopping the floor of the pub after hours. She slipped on the wet floor and, to catch her balance, fell backward into the chair. She sat there for just a moment to catch her breath. Within weeks, a woman who had been perfectly healthy was diagnosed with a rapidly progressing brain tumor. She died shortly after. The list goes on. A delivery driver who sat in the chair to tie his shoelaces, dead in a crash the same day. An American tourist who insisted on sitting in it for a photo, dead of a heart attack before her flight home. By the late 1970s, Tony Earnshaw had reached his breaking point. The Busby Stoop Inn was becoming a mausoleum. The atmosphere in the pub was heavy. Staff were terrified to go near the corner where the chair stood. Earnshaw decided he had to get rid of it. But how? You can't sell a cursed object. That would be unethical. You can't burn it. Folklore dictates that if you burn a vessel containing a spirit, you simply release the spirit to roam free, potentially causing even more havoc. The chair acted as a cage for the curse. Destroying the cage would let the beast out. Earnshaw first tried to move it to the cellar permanently, but people kept finding it. It drew them in. It was as if the chair wanted to be found. Finally, in 1978, Earnshaw made a phone call to the nearby Thirsk Museum. He spoke to the curator and made an offer. "You can have the chair. It's a piece of local history. But you have to promise me one thing. You must never, ever let anyone sit in it." The museum accepted, but they treated the object with a reverence usually reserved for radioactive material. When the movers came to take the chair from the pub, they refused to sit in it to test its weight. They handled it with gloves. They loaded it into the truck and drove slowly. When it arrived at the museum, the staff were faced with a dilemma. If they put it on the floor, a child might run under the rope. A skeptic might jump over the barrier. The risk was too high. So, they made a decision that stands to this day. They called in a workman to install a heavy bracket high up on the wall. They hoisted the Busby Stoop Chair 5 feet into the air and bolted it securely to the plaster. Today, the chair hangs there still. It looks innocuous, a small, dark, vertical shape against the white wall of the museum. But looking at it triggers a primal instinct in many visitors, a feeling of unease. Skeptics, of course, have explanations. They point to the law of large numbers. Thousands of people likely sat in that chair over 300 years and didn't die. We only hear about the ones who did. It's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, drawing a circle around the bullet holes after you've fired the gun. Psychologists suggest the nocebo effect. If you truly believe a chair will kill you, your body goes into a state of high stress. Your cortisol spikes. You become distracted. If you are a pilot or a driver, that distraction can be fatal. You manifest your own demise because you are waiting for it. But these explanations fail to account for the outliers. The cleaning lady who sat by accident. The chimney sweep in the 1800s who knew nothing of the legend but was found dead on the road the next day. The sheer volume of coincidences clustered around this one specific piece of furniture is statistically staggering. There is also the theory of psychometry. This is the paranormal belief that objects act like magnetic tape. Thomas Busby poured his dying rage, his humiliation, and his murderous intent into that wood. He gripped the arms and screamed a death wish. Is it possible that intense emotional energy can alter the structure of an object? Can wood hold a charge? We know that radiation can cling to objects for thousands of years, invisible but deadly. Why not emotion? Why not hate? The Busby Stoop Inn is still there, though the names and owners have changed over the years. The crossroads where Thomas Busby's body rotted in a cage is now a busy intersection. The world has moved on. But inside the Thirsk Museum, time stands still. The staff there are very careful. When they dust the exhibits, they use long-handled brushes to clean the chair. They do not touch it. They do not take it down. Thomas Busby was a man who felt powerless in life. He was bullied by his father-in-law, belittled by his community, and executed by the state. He wanted control. He wanted respect. And through a strange alchemy of violence and time, he achieved it. He turned a simple domestic object into a weapon. He ensured that 300 years after his neck snapped in the hangman's noose, people would still be afraid of him. So, if you ever find yourself in North Yorkshire, visit the museum. Go see the chair. Look at the worn varnish where desperate hands once gripped the armrests. Look at the seat where so many unsuspecting souls rested for the last time. But whatever you do, don't ask them to take it down. And for God's sake, don't sit down. This is the Relic Room. We delve into the shadows of history to find the truth, no matter how disturbing it may be. If you have a theory about the Busby Stoop Chair, or if you know of an object in your hometown that is best left untouched, tell us in the comments below. Until next time, remember, some legends are best left untested.